Looking at this a bit at an economic and a financial perspective, David, operating in this manner, how cost efficient is it in the end?
I think what you have to understand is that central labs or labs inside companies and then all the labs in the more public research system that is where most of this goes on, they have their strengths and weaknesses. So, for example, labs inside a company are more oriented towards the mission of the company. They're focused on a particular business solution. It sort of shapes the way you go about it. That's a good thing. On the other hand, they miss things that are going on in the broader ecosystem. They're probably a little bit more expensive than people in the university system, but they tend to broaden IP. They tend to broaden it out. They tend to create a broader area where you can play. And at the end of the day, having intellectual property that you have and other people don't have automatic access to is one of the ways upon which you compete with other companies. So there's a place for internal research and what you might call closed, I think. So that's one thing. On the other hand, there's very much a place for the other stuff. It's more cost effective, it's more free, it's going to come up with ideas you could never come up with and connections you could never have possibly mapped as a company. And of course, universities and other research institutions have access to facilities that you could never imagine building inside a company. I mean, we would never go and build the Hadron Collider inside BP, but once in a blue moon, we actually may want to use it. So striking that balance between what you do by yourself and what you participate in and access in the broader ecosystem of research in the world is a matter of economic efficiency. Right. And then how much of each you do will depend very much upon the sector you're in. So the energy industry is not like the software and digital industry.
And what can go wrong with this? What's hard about it?
What's hard about it at the end of the day is this issue of who owns, who controls, who can use intellectual property as a point of competitive advantage. Now, open innovation, in principle, everybody has access to it. Yeah. And if everybody has access to it, how can you have an advantage through it? So that's the disadvantage, if you like, of the open innovation ecosystem. And the
disadvantage, there's a risk that you could lose control of.
There's a risk that if everybody's got access to you, how can you use this thing to be competitive? But of course, and that's the advantage of closed, is you really have it. It's your own, it's mine. Nobody else can have it, and so you can compete with it.
So, Henry, what, in the cases that you looked at, when open innovation doesn't work, why?
So I think if I can first start with the economic justification, sure. I think you can think of open innovation in 4 dimensions: cost, capacity, time, and risk. The cost equation is sometimes it's cheaper to work with things on the outside, in part because when you work with them, there's been some level of work already performed that you didn't have to pay for. And in turn, all the blind alleys and dead ends that were encountered along the way are in the past. Whereas if you take that project on entirely internally, you pay for everything, every blind alley, every wrong turn, all that stuff. The capacity issue is many internal labs, I think, over-allocate their resources, so they're actually congested. And if they take on additional internal projects, you actually don't get more output out the other side. You simply create more congestion and can actually slow all of it down. And another way to think about open innovation is you actually get extra capacity. Then there's the time factor. You can, again, by working with others, sometimes start in the middle rather than start at the beginning. So you can, in many conditions, get to market faster by doing this collaborative approach. And then the last is the risk, is that when you do this in a way that engages other parties, often you have to provide some portion of the value to them as part of their incentive or reward for the collaboration. But in turn, the risk is also shared to some extent with them too. And so this, for many companies, particularly for smaller companies, is very attractive because they don't necessarily want or have the capital to take on the entire project themselves. better for them to collaborate with others who are also sharing part of the risk and the reward.
Okay, so this is fundamentally requires a re-engineering of the way you do R&D from the back office in the legal department all the way through the lab.
Yes, if you want a metaphor for this, you could think of the closed model as a marathon, from the lab all the way to the market.
Right.
The new model is more of a relay race, where the baton is passed multiple times across to different runners in the journey from the lab to the market. And each time there's that handoff, there are these coordination challenges, there are these intellectual property issues that have to be thought through, there's the financing and how that's going to happen. So although there have these cost, capacity, time, and risk benefits, there are also these challenges in the relay race as well.
Let's talk about the policy for a moment here. This is obviously a terribly important trend economically, both in Europe and around the world. As a matter of fact, Henry, I understand you're at the moment in the middle of a study of the policy in this field. You're working on a study now with the Science Business Innovation Board.
That's right.
It's supported by BP in participating in it and the other members of the board. And it's a work in progress, but I'd like to get a little bit of a sense as to what are you coming up with? What is important for a policymaker to bear in mind? Is this, first of all, is this trend a threat or an opportunity?
Yes.
Yes, all right, okay, fine.
Well, we were just talking a moment ago about the challenges around intellectual property at the level of individual firms or universities working together. But this is also an important policy issue as well. And so one thing we're looking at are both the costs of patenting within Europe, either in national governments, then the European Patent Office, the time it takes to get patents. It's very expensive, longer than it is in either Japan or the US to get patents.
So this is a friction in the European system that
right.
doesn't exist so much elsewhere.
There is friction in Japan and the US, but there is more friction in Europe. And so this is one of the challenges that I think can be addressed to promote more of that relay race that we were talking about. Another intervention that's possible is there is something called a provisional patent offered in the US for a 12-month period of time that allows people to get some provisional protection while they pursue a more sustained patent or other protection approach. And this is particularly useful in the university context when you want to publish and get your research out there, but still keep some opportunity to have commercialization exploration activities as well. Some provisional coverage and protection can accelerate the diffusion of this research because you don't forfeit your protection if you do the much simpler provisional patent filing first before entering into the longer, more expensive filing in the formal European system.
So this is a look at the IP
exactly.
policy.
So we were talking about the IP as
David,
a source of friction.
I mean, what is your view on this? If you're talking about open innovation, what is the policy challenge for IP?
I just would reinforce firstly what Henry said, in as much as each nation inside Europe has its own mechanisms for creating intellectual property. They're all a little bit different, and now what you're trying to do is move towards a system whereby you can get a patent which works across Europe as quickly as you can get a patent in America and as cost effectively as you can get a patent in America. And I agree that that would be a very good step to make, so I just reinforce that point. I think more broadly the challenge for policymakers is both is to make sure that great intellectual property and great ideas, if you like, of which there are many great institutions all around the world and certainly in Europe, they end up in great businesses, and they end up making lots of money, and they end up creating wealth, if you like, in certain parts of the world. Mm-hmm. And that's the policy challenge, is to have an effective research system, which there's some great things going on already, but also to move it through to business. And the process Henry was describing, this sort of relay race, is what can do that. So for policymakers, what you have to do to make that work, you have to have great research. You have to have excellence in your research and education systems. You have to have the basic stuff necessary to start the whole thing off. Mm-hmm. Then you need to support policies that enable people to move that through the different stages of development. So it's got to be built out, it's got to be demonstrated, it's got to be deployed. This is where things like venture capital has a role, well, SMEs have a role, tech transfer offices has a role, these clusters you build around university, all these things have a role in moving the idea closer and closer to a marketable opportunity. I mean, governments in particular can help because they spend a lot of money wherever you are in the world. And so through the way in which they spend the government's funds, they can create a pull and they can enable that system to work or not. I mean, it's up to them. So how governments spend their money can help this whole process, if you like. And then I think lastly, every policymaker has got to decide where they're going to focus, and what they think is the most important thing to resource. Which sectors, which parts of their whole landscape they want to really try and make this work in, and it'll be different for different places. So that this gets you very close to difficult things like industrial policy or all that kind of stuff. But that's really what it's about. It's deciding where you focus.
So if you come to Europe then, where should the focus be?
The European Union has its own natural circumstances. I'm really familiar with the energy system, if you like. Right. So I mean, I struggle to answer that question in respect of consumer products or something. It was very difficult. But in respect of the energy system, there are some grand challenges, if you like, across the whole of Europe. The grid and the interconnection of a grid and how all the different sources of power can connect to that and effectively be leveraged across Europe is a great example of something that the European Union as a whole can facilitate. And there's lots and lots of technology that needs to be developed in order to make that work. And people talk about smart grids and all that kind of thing. Well, it's a very, very big grid across Europe. Right. And currently it runs in lots of different bits and pieces. And so it's very difficult to make that work as one very large super smart grid, if you want to call it that. So that's a great example of where I would expect to see real focus, if you like, in Europe, and creating making the whole innovation ecosystem from ideation right the way through to large companies and commercializable products working.